This is Norman Kissinger from Redeeming the Time Brothers Ministries, and I'm going to read a passage out of Leviticus chapter 25, and we're going to start in verses 35 and run to verse 38. And then I want to make a comment about this kind of culturally of what's been going on. It says, if one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, that you shall help him, like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. Now, in this passage of Scripture, obviously here it's talking about, the Old Testament law. And I have been watching about how to treat your fellow citizens, basically, in Israel, fellow Jews. But actually, it's interesting that if you study the Old Testament, you'll find that there are many people who are Israelites that were not Jewish. Uriah the Hittite, and other examples of people that were actually not of Hebrew descent, but were still Israelites in their nationality and their birth, and were part of the nation of Israel and worshipped God. So that's not something that's clearly shown. You have to you observe it as you go through the Scripture, but it's not something that's blaringly out there. But in this passage here, it says that your brethren, the Israelites, those that were worshiping the Lord of the nation of Israel, God commanded the Israelites that they were not to take advantage of their brethren, basically here financially. So if they were poor, you were to help them out. You weren't supposed to lend them money at interest. You were supposed to give them food. You weren't supposed to make a profit off the food that you gave to your brethren. And you were to treat them the same way, basically, that God had treated Israel by taking them from a place of slavery where they could have died out as a nation, or still been in slavery for many more thousands of years, and he moved them to the land of Canaan and gave them basically, before they were sinful, so that they owned from the Mediterranean literally all the way to the Euphrates River. But God gave them all of that land as their land. Now, the reason I picked this kind of obscure passage wasn't so much to talk about finances here, although the Old Testament law has some stuff that probably would be very helpful for us even today, but to make a point about the culture today. Because one of the things that I have as a interest, I don't know if I call it a ministry, but just looking at all the cultural trends that are going on and seeing how that they're changing the church and how they measure up to Scripture, and how that the church is being affected by the culture here, especially in America. So a lot of my devotions and my talks end up being along those lines. Well, one of the things that I want to say that we should be preaching to people about both the Old and the New Testament is this fact. The world knows, because they read 5 verses out of the Old Testament. They picked the 5 they hated the worst and read them. And I mean that facetiously and in reality. They didn't read all of the Scriptures. I'm going to show in just a minute here. But the world reads 5 verses out of the Old Testament and calls the God of the Bible racist and, hates homosexuals and hates people, and all the statements that they would make about that because they pick 5 verses out of the Old Testament. Well, God is not apologetic about doing what will save his people. Okay, and he was very serious back then about that. So when it comes to the Old Testament law, he did living in a culture that was very violent, and a culture and where the worship of false gods would be a life or death type of situation for an individual. And I don't mean that because God killed those or ordered the execution of some of those people that worship those false gods, especially the priests and the people who propagated it. but the fact that worshiping the false gods caused people's lives to be in. There was human sacrifices in most of the gods that the Israelites worshiped. They didn't just pick a new god that was some sort of an owl that was sitting on the tree and they bowed down to it and hooted. They picked gods like Molech that you threw your babies into after they were born as a sacrifice to get your grain to grow. And the temple prostitution and all kinds of other stuff that would go on that today we would be absolutely appalled by, hopefully. Well, I don't know that our nation would so much, but we should be absolutely appalled by that anybody would be involved in. These other false gods were not nice false gods. There is no such thing, but they were not nice. They were evil, evil, evil. And so God would very much execute people for things. And he was very harsh in the Old Testament about sexual practices because that was a form of worship. Even the pagan religions use sexual practices as a form of worship. And so it was tied to that. There was a tie to that. God always tied, as I've been listening through the prophets, God always tied the idea of idol worship with adultery and being unfaithful. That sexual practices and how they're done are clearly a form of worship. Okay, and so it's not just that but that's kind of a different story there. But what I was going to say is that in spite of the harsh stuff that you can find in the Old Testament, one of the things that we need to proclaim, because I was listening through all of the Old Testament here, and especially the Old Testament law, is that the Old Testament law is full of examples like this, where God was calling, was protecting, and this goes back 3,000 years at least. So God was protecting the individual, the poor, that the poor person would not be taken advantage of, that the poor person would have food, that the oxen would be able to eat some grain while it was treading out the wheat or the grain, and it could eat some of it, so that it could get its fill because it was worthy of its hire, even the oxen. In the Old Testament, God was taking care of the poor, the widow, the female captured person. So in another example, there's a place in there where basically Israelites went to war with somebody or had to go to war with somebody, and they brought back young maidens or something, it gave very specific rules on how they were to be treated, and they were to be treated with respect, and in certain cases let go. And anyway, that you can go back and read all of the different laws and what it says. But my point is to us as Christians is that the Old Testament law was a law of love. Okay, it was, the entire thing was about love. They claim, the liberal world claims that it's not about love, but it very much is about love. If any behavior, doesn't reflect God or would hurt men, the Old Testament law dealt with it. And yes, in the Old Testament, they dealt with it harshly, but they dealt with it harshly in the Old Testament before Christ, because it was, in a sense, life or death, and that it was people's lives or death. And it was and it was an eternal matter, obviously, also. But the Old Testament law is full of examples of kindness, not just examples where God was pronouncing judgment on somebody who had done something wrong. And so we need to, again, be careful that we don't allow the world to dictate to us what God's word says. And maybe that's the point of what I would be saying today. We do not have to allow the world, who have no right to hardly even look into it unless they're going to look into it with reverence and respect and understanding, and look into it with the attempt to try to give it the fair play that they would expect out of us. But we don't, again, have to apologize for God's word. It was a law of love. And so many examples of that in the Old Testament as you look at the Old Testament law. So don't buy the lie that the New Testament is grace, the Old Testament is law, the New Testament is Christ and forgiveness for everyone. The Old Testament is evil, almost the evil God that hates everybody. Oh, no. That is the misinterpretation and the heresy of the liberal media and the liberal mindset and the liberals in universities about understanding the scripture without doing a thorough, honest look at the themes of the scripture from beginning to end and what they mean and why they were there. And when that happens, then the whole of the scripture makes sense. So I say these kind of things here, especially I've been on this kick of being frustrated with the fact that I feel like the church always feels like it has to apologize for what it believes. And the Bible can stand on its own. And we need to stand up boldly and just say, the truth about a lot of this. So don't take every statement either that a Christian makes or certainly every statement the people of the world make, because they often are misinterpreting the scriptures intentionally so that they can justify the fact that they're living evil. Okay, that's just what I'm going to say. That they would charge their brethren. They would violate every principle of the law. They want to look holy and righteous, but they very much do not practice the principles of love. And so keep that in mind as you prepare sermons, as you prepare talks, that we do not need to apologize for our faith or for the scripture. It will stand on its own. It has stood the test of time and changed mankind forever. From the time of Christ until now, affecting every nation, the true gospel in a positive way, in so many different ways. God bless you today. Just remember to hold your head up. Do not be afraid to proclaim the truth. And we will, as we go into these potentially end times here, or in these post-Christian era of America at least, and that we can stand our ground and God can use us to save some souls, even if it looks around us like sometimes the ship is sinking. God bless you. You have a great week.